Hello, so glad you can join us. Here's what's happening. A presidential invitation for a meet and greet.
He's a very nice gentleman, and he's going to come to the White House very shortly.
Striking a friendly tone after months of acrimony between the U.S. and Canada.
Conditions are pretty soggy at the moment.
Ominous outlook, a prediction that has this country on the cusp of a recession.
The tree just went bump like that. It was so fast.
Plus, a sudden and powerful spring storm leaves a trail of destruction.
CTV National News with Sandy Ronaldo.
Donald Trump made it known today that he and Mark Carney will meet in Washington within the next week. The U.S. president also told a TV audience what he thought about the results of Monday's election. CTV's Washington Bureau Chief Joy Malbon was listening in. All right, hey, Joy, what exactly did Trump say?
Sandy, the president, he was nice. But in his Trumpian way, he did say that the top two candidates hated him after all of his trolling and threats to take over Canada. Still, Trump seemed respectful, saying he congratulated Prime Minister Carney on his win, even called him a gentleman, and looks forward to making a trade deal, saying he'll meet with the Prime Minister in person very soon. Here's the president.
Well, I think we're going to have a great relationship. He called me up yesterday. He said, "Let's make a deal." You know, he was running for office. They both hated Trump, and it was the one that hated Trump, I think, the least that won. I actually think the conservative hated me much more than the so-called liberal. He's a pretty liberal guy. But no, I spoke to him yesterday. Couldn't have been nicer, and I congratulated him. You know, it was a very mixed signal because it's almost even, which makes it very complicated for the country. It's a pretty tight race, but he's a very nice gentleman, and he's going to come to the White House very shortly, within the next week or less.
Positively congenial. You're absolutely right, Joy. You know, it's hard to predict what that meeting might look like, but I suppose we can base it on what we've seen recently when other leaders have come to the White House, right?
Oh, for sure. I mean, past presidents have put on a show for visiting Canadian prime ministers. I remember when President Obama and Prime Minister Trudeau both of them were here, and there was this big military parade, a state dinner, and jokes about hockey and milk in bags. Now, when world leaders visit the White House now, there's a lunch and a photo op in the Oval Office, and that becomes kind of a de facto press conference. Britain's prime minister came with gifts and a personal invitation from Prince Charles. Other foreign leaders use flattery, and some have even shown defiance, like Ukraine's President Zelensky. But after Trump's threats to Canada's sovereignty, navigating this new relationship with President Trump, it's going to be tricky. We know that Trump likes a win. So when Trump said that the Prime Minister, Mark Carney, proposed making a deal, that is music to this president's ears, who's in a bitter trade war with the world. Sandy?
All right, Joy, thank you so much. Now, we are starting to see the ripple-down effect of Donald Trump's tariffs and more. U.S. economic growth declined sharply in the first quarter of 2025, and new Stats Canada figures show our economy is also slowing. The news coming on a day, a brand new forecast predicts we are headed for a recession. CTV's Heather Wright now on the numbers, the reasons, and what all of this means going forward. Heather.
Well, Sandy, there isn't one singular factor pushing Canada's economy toward a recession, according to this report from Deloitte, but rather a mixed bag of tariffs, slow growth, and overarching uncertainty.
Canada's economy shrank in February, with more economic headwinds in the future, according to Deloitte, which predicts a recession later this year.
All in all, conditions are pretty soggy at the moment. I think we need some clarity on what our relationship with the U.S. is actually going to be.
According to Statistics Canada, gross domestic product decreased by 0.2% in February, with 12 of the country's 20 industrial sectors posting declines. Experts say supply chain disruptions from the severe February storm in eastern Canada also contributed to the slowdown. And while these soft numbers are not directly tied to Donald Trump's trade war, which didn't begin in earnest until March, manufacturing did see an increase in February, which could be due to efforts by companies to get products shipped before tariffs went into effect.
You're seeing an increase in economic activity due to the fact that there's people are trying to get their orders in advance.
In the United States, markets opened sharply lower this morning on news the world's largest economy shrank in the first quarter. And the impact of a sluggish American economy is expected to trickle north, compounding challenges to Canada's economic growth that existed before the trade war began.
The Canadian economy is not growing in any meaningful, substantial, sustainable way. That's something that this new government has to address very quickly, and it goes beyond just tariffs.
Economists are predicting a slight bump to the GDP numbers from March, but we'll be watching the second and third quarters closely, as that's when they expect to see the impact from tariffs come through. Sandy.
Thanks, Heather. Let's bring in CTV's chief financial correspondent, Amanda Lang. Amanda, I want to talk Donald Trump, U.S. first, and then Canada. Now, he is out there, the U.S. president, blaming the former president, Joe Biden, for creating these economic problems. Any truth to that?
Not a lot of credibility to that if you're looking at the GDP contraction. A big chunk of that was a surge in imports, Sandy, up more than 40% as businesses and some consumers tried to get ahead of tariffs. Imports are subtracted from the economic growth data because eventually they're counted when a consumer or a business buys them. So to avoid double counting, you subtract it. That's what dragged growth down. That is entirely tariff driven. So it would be hard to see it any other way other than at this White House's feet.
Okay, tariffs front and center, obviously. I would assume that's Mark Carney's priority, given these numbers.
Yeah, the weakness we saw in our economy in February also sort of ahead of the tariff impact. Job number one would be try to get some maneuverability on auto and auto parts tariffs, on steel and aluminum. We've seen some signs that Donald Trump is hearing from his business leaders, and he's started to moderate on auto parts, for instance. Now might be the time to try to get a negotiated concession on things that are already starting to hurt in Canada, rather than try to do any kind of big, grand replay of the whole deal. Actually get the nitty-gritty worked out now.
Okay. Amanda, thanks so much. Now, as we've been saying, the chaos unleashed by Donald Trump's tariffs is expected to be the biggest challenge facing the Prime Minister when Parliament, which is expected to get back to work on May the 6th, resumes in a House that looks so very different, and with the other parties working to regroup. CTV's senior political correspondent Mike Lucatura now with some insight into what lies ahead. Mike.
Well, Sandy, as Prime Minister Mark Carney is holding transition meetings, federal Conservatives are assessing the results, while some of their provincial cousins have some pointed criticism.
I hope they do some soul searching.
Nova Scotia Premier Tim Houston didn't hold back in his assessment of the federal election.
I think the Conservative Party of Canada was very good at pushing people away, not so good at pulling people in.
Ontario Premier Doug Ford was one of those people. His team openly criticized Poilievre's campaign, and clearly there's still bad blood.
Last time I checked, Pierre Poilievre never came out in our election. Matter of fact, him or one of his lieutenants told every one of his members, don't you dare go out and help the PCs. Isn't that ironic? But anyways, I'm not going to dig deep into this.
A federal Conservative campaign source tells CTV News that despite losing his seat, Pierre Poilievre is making calls to the grassroots of the party to get their feedback. One defeated Conservative MP who once falsely claimed the cost of living was driving parents to traffic their kids posted a message online calling for her party to be a more moderate opposition.
To hold them accountable, but find that sweet spot where we are not so extreme, you know.
Without a seat in the House of Commons, Poilievre could have one of his MP-elects step down and give up their riding so he can run in a by-election.
And then the Prime Minister has up to 6 months to actually call that by-election. So do the math. We're looking, at the end of 2025 before that by-election is probably even called.
With Jagmeet Singh losing his seat, the NDP must also choose an interim leader, and a party source says caucus could start that process next week. After failing to win more seats, Green Party co-leader Jonathan Pedneau announced he is stepping down, leaving Elizabeth May as the party's sole leader and only MP. Sandy?
Mike LeCouture. Thank you, Mike. Well, hydro crews are working hard to restore power after severe winds blew in and blew down trees and power lines in parts of Ontario and Quebec. The storm headed east, but not before inflicting some serious injuries as well. CTV's Quebec Bureau Chief Geneviève Beauchemin went outdoors to survey the damage. Geneviève.
Yes, Andy, the very intense portion of the storm lasted under 5 minutes in many regions, but that was enough to cause damage. Driving rain and sudden gusts ripped through the Montreal area at nightfall. Winds snapped a tree that fell on a 15-year-old boy. This as he headed to basketball practice. It crushed his chest and pinned him. Firefighters pulled him out in critical condition. His distraught father came to see the scene today. He says this was incredible bad luck that came just a few months after the boy's mother, his wife, died of cancer. His son is undergoing a series of surgeries now. A few kilometers away, winds taking down electricity lines sparked chaos at Maisonneuve-Rosemont Hospital. A power outage plunged part of the hospital into darkness, blew out windows, and left some healthcare workers trapped in elevators.
One of the generators didn't function, so we couldn't have backup for our respirators, the electricity, and all the apparatus that we need for electrocoagulation for bleeding.
Angry doctors and nurses held a protest. They've long been demanding a major overhaul to the aging hospital. In Ontario, too, the storm is linked to power outages, injuries, and damage. As extremely high winds whipped the region, Hamilton Mayor Andrea Horwath fell on stairs outside City Hall. She had to undergo surgery for a broken wrist. Her elbow and legs are also injured. In Guelph, gusts of more than 90 kilometers an hour snapped and uprooted trees that came down on homes and cars.
As I was cooking dinner, and I said, look at the storm outside, and as I moved away to go back to my dinner, she goes, the tree fell on my car.
Now the cleanup is underway and crews have been working all day to restore power to tens of thousands of homes and businesses. Sandy.
Thanks, Jen. The sexual assault trial of 5 former World Junior hockey players resumed today in London, Ontario. The court was shown video taken at a bar and at the hotel where the alleged assault took place. CTV's Adrian Gobriel is following the London trial. And Adrian, what exactly was on that video?
Sandy, day 3 of this trial has given us a glimpse into several videos which will be used as evidence. We see the players on that World Junior team dancing with the alleged victim at a local bar. We also see video recordings after the alleged group's sexual assault. Entering the court at a brisk pace, each of the accused arrived at this Ontario Superior Court in London to hear the trial's first witness. Defense attorney Daniel Brown, who's representing Alex Fermenton, began the trial's first cross-examination, questioning the evidence gathered by London police detective Tiffany Waukee, including the percentage of alcohol in the 8 drinks said to have been consumed by the alleged victim, who we can only identify as EM. Detective Waukee said she was unaware how strong the drinks were. The jury of 9 women and 5 men were also shown video inside Jack's bar, where EM can be seen on the dance floor with one of the accused, Michael McLeod. Other players are also seen dancing with or near EM at different times. Around 1:30 in the morning, bar security video shows McLeod and EM leaving together, eventually arriving at this London, Ontario hotel where they had consensual sex, though the jury has been shown a group text message from McLeod inviting teammates to room 209. Multiple young men began to arrive. That's when the alleged group sexual assault began. Former World Junior Team Canada captain Dylan Dubé, Cal Foote, Carter Hart, McLeod, and Fermenton have each been charged with sexual assault. McLeod is also facing one charge of being party to the offense. The jury were also shown 2 cell phone videos from inside the hotel room. In one, you hear a male's voice ask, "You're okay with this, right?" EM replies, "Yeah, I'm okay," though the Crown claims that she was intimidated and manipulated into staying in the hotel room. Now, this is a case that revolves around consent and whether it was granted throughout the early morning hours. Sandy.
Adrian Gobriel. Coming up after the break, crime trends in Canada. why some communities are more vulnerable. A devastated mayor of Vancouver spoke about the failings of the mental health care system after 11 people died at a weekend festival allegedly killed by a driver who was under their care but on extended leave from hospital. The mayor called it a health crisis that's become a public safety crisis. CTV's BC Bureau Chief Andrew Johnson on what was said and what needs to change. Andrew.
Sandy, Vancouver Mayor Ken Sim says he finds it hard to accept the man accused of mass murder at a Filipino festival was being supervised by a care team, part of what Sim calls a recurring pattern. Kaiji Adam Lowe is the 30-year-old police say was driving the SUV that sped through a street packed with pedestrians Saturday night. We've learned this week Lowe's brother was murdered early last year, and Lowe later launched a GoFundMe asking for donations after he said his grieving mother had attempted suicide. Adam Lowe, as you mentioned, Sandy, was on extended leave from hospital. That means he'd been discharged but was still considered an involuntary patient and needed to adhere to conditions. Those conditions could include living at a specific address, having a curfew, taking medication in front of witnesses, or going to mandatory appointments.
This is incredibly difficult to hear and even harder to accept because it points to a deeper failure in the mental health system. I continue to call on senior levels of government to act to expand compassionate mandatory care, to resource secure treatment beds beyond the 400 currently committed.
Vancouver Coastal Health tells us there was no indication Lowe was not following his treatment plan or was a safety risk. The mayor also announced today there are plans for a public memorial in about 2 weeks to honor the lives lost in this city still in disbelief. Sandy.
Andrew, thank you. And BC Premier David Eby has also declared Friday an official day of mourning. Now, we tend to think of Canada's big cities as hotbeds for violent crime. But now it turns out the rate of crime is higher and more severe in rural areas. With the leader of the pack, now, Saskatchewan. CTV's Alison Bamford in Delisle with a look at the numbers and what's going on. Alison.
Sandy, overall crime, including violent crimes like homicides, intimate partner violence, and assaults, are happening at higher rates in rural areas compared to the big cities. The Crime Severity Index, or CSI, tracks the volume and severity of these crimes. New data from Statistics Canada shows Saskatchewan has the highest rural CSI in the country, followed by Manitoba, Alberta, and BC. The latest numbers are from 2023, and they show violent crime rates were 1.7 times higher in rural parts of the country. PEI, Ontario, and Quebec are the exceptions, where overall crime rates are actually lower in rural areas. In general, rural communities also experience higher rates of property crime. Here in Delisle, the local fire department had equipment stolen during a break-in over Christmas. The crew lost thousands of dollars in life-saving tools.
It's very disheartening to think that the same people that we may have to go and help are stealing the tools that we need to go help them.
In Saskatchewan, rural crime and safety were ballot box issues for many during last fall's provincial election. The government has since recruited a new marshals service to help the RCMP, and recruits should have boots on the ground next week. Sandy?
Alison Bamford. On a completely different note, fans of the Vancouver Whitecaps will be watching closely as their team goes up against Inter Miami, led by Lionel Messi.
Nelson into the middle. White, it's behind him. Sabi, the trailer is Berhalter, and the Whitecaps score their second.
Now that goal last Thursday in front of 53,000 fans at BC Place sealed a 2-0 victory for the Caps. Now they need to hold on against the soccer superstar on his South Florida turf. The team with the best combined score over 2 games heads to the CONCACAF Champions final game. More to come, don't go away. Some international news for you now. Pakistan says it has credible intelligence that India is planning to strike within days.
India has apparently decided to tread the dangerous path
of irrationality and confrontation, which will have catastrophic consequences.
Soldiers on both sides of the highly militarized border have exchanged fire as tensions rise following a deadly attack on tourists in Indian-administered Kashmir. India claims Pakistan-backed militants were behind the massacre, something that Pakistan denies. And Israel is asking for help in fighting a massive wildfire. People drove through flames while others abandoned cars on a highway. First responders have been struggling to control the flames fueled by dry conditions and high winds. CTV National News returns in a moment. Nearly 20 million Canadians voted in Monday's election, a record turnout. So you can imagine the frustration for some in Canada's far north who faced obstacles marking their ballots. CTV's Alex Carpa spoke with Indigenous leaders about the challenges.
TV Tulagak was keen to vote in his first federal election, but his excitement was quickly quashed when he went to the polling station in his northern Quebec community of Iviu-Hivik, only to find it was closed.
I was frustrated, I was sad.
Tulagak says he heard from the town's mayor that the election workers had arrived in the community but quickly left without any votes being cast.
This is not right. This is, they took our votes away. And this is illegal.
Kativik Regional Government's chairperson Hilda Snowball confirmed to CTV News that many residents in the surrounding Nunavut region were unable to vote. I was shocked and unsettled about the news regarding the early closing of polling stations, she said in a statement. I was outraged to hear that some were not open at all. The Makivik Corporation, which represents Inuit in Nunavut, is calling for Elections Canada to investigate, calling the situation, quote, unacceptable. Despite more than 68% voter turnout across the country, ballot numbers in Canada's north fell well below the national average. The riding of Churchill-Kiiwetinogaski in northern Manitoba, for example, only saw about 43% of eligible voters in that region cast their ballots.
There is a long history of Inuit people being having uneven access to being able to cast their ballot.
Tulagak says this never should have happened.
That was unacceptable, unfair election. They should be given 12 hours or at least 10.
A source with Elections Canada had told CTV News that it was difficult to get workers and materials to some communities because of weather. We reached out to Elections Canada to get an update on the situation, but didn't receive a response back. Sandy?
CTV's Alex Carpa. Thanks, Alex. And thank you for sharing your time with us. I'm Sandy Ronaldo. Your local CTV News is coming up, and we'll see you tomorrow, we hope. Bye for now. Have a nice evening.